À Aix-les-Bains et autour du lac du Bourget, Radio Grand Lac, la radio de l'identité locale.
Your English Weekly. Your English Weekly. La chronique 100% en anglais de Radio Grand Lac avec Sinead.
Bonjour à tous ceux qui nous écoutent en Radio Grand Lac 92.1 FM et bienvenue à l'émission Your English Weekly, animée par moi-même, Sinead, professeur d'anglais. L'objectif de cette émission est stimuler la langue anglaise et l'expression anglaise aussi. Chaque semaine, vous découvrez une nouvelle leçon, soit d'un article, une histoire inspirée d'un élève, un étudiant, un ami, comme aujourd'hui, par Your English Workshop. Cette émission est sponsorisée par Your English Workshop, qui est un centre de formation pour l'apprentissage de l'anglais pour les enfants et les adultes certifiés Calliope. Je profite de ce moment pour vous rappeler de nos stages de Pâques et avec notre partenaire de la voile. Donc, restez à l'écoute dans les 15 prochaines minutes pour notre expression de la semaine et notre conversation en anglais avec James Shepard. La leçon de cette semaine est de niveau B2. Hi, and welcome back to Your English Weekly. Today we have a new lesson. Our lesson is a B2 level today. And my guest is James Shepard. Hello, James.
Hello.
So James is going to give us a brief description about a poem and a poet who's called Philip Larkin. James, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, very rapidly, I come from the north of England. I've lived in France since 1972 and in Savoie for, I think, 25 years. I'm a retired professor from the university in Savoie.
Okay.
There we are.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, James, thanks for all of that. James, before we start, do you know the expression? Because every week I have a quick expression in English. And I'm wondering, do you know what chasing rainbows is?
Well, I've done that for part of my life, I think.
I think I have too, actually. Well, listeners, stay tuned till the end and you will find out what chasing rainbows is all about. So, James, we're going to explain to our listeners today before you start and you give us your lesson, or, well, your reading. Would you be able to explain some words that they're going to hear? So one of the words that the audience are going to hear is verses. Can you explain to them what this means?
Okay, well, verses is an English word which comes from the French, as you can perhaps imagine, and it's a section of a poem. We can also use the word stanza, so it's a group of lines, 4, 6, or 8, which go together and split up a poem.
Fantastic. And we're going to hear the word court. Now, we know this word, but there's a particularity about it that I'm going to come to at the end. So, court, catch, court. Enchanted and endless. What does that mean, please?
Enchanted means something which is magical. That's a synonym of enchanted. Something which is out of the ordinary, which is much more powerful than something which is normal.
Oh, fantastic. And endless?
Endless is without end.
Without end, non-stop. And what about swirling? Our auditors are going to hear the word swirling. What does that mean, swirling?
Well, swirling is a very, very old word. It either comes from the Norwegian or from the Dutch. Swirlen. In French, am I allowed to translate or do I have to explain in English? You would say tourbillon or tourbillonner.
Perfect.
It's often usually associated with water, but it can also be smoke or clouds.
Okay, which brings me to my next word, pouring. What does that mean, pouring?
Well, pouring usually refers to, pouring milk into tea, for instance. For example,
exactly.
I presume that's the expression, that's the context that people, your listeners will recognize first.
Pour a drop of milk into the tea.
Exactly. But in this context, we also use it for rain, and we say that it's pouring with rain. There's a very nice expression in English which is similar, and that is, it's raining cats and dogs. Okay?
Yes.
Il pleut à verse.
Yes. And newlyweds, we're going to hear the word newlyweds. What does that mean?
Well, wed comes from the word wedding, which is a synonym for marriage.
So they just got married then.
They've just got married.
So a newlywed is a just got married person.
Exactly. And if you say newlyweds, then you're referring to the couple, of course.
Of course. And what about conjure up?
To conjure up, this refers to a magical idea which comes from something that you see, for instance, in nature. Okay, when something is said, you might associate that thing with something which comes to your mind, which is a memory. And that's the case in the story that I'm going to tell. It's an association of ideas, if you like.
Oh, fantastic. Well, off you go.
Okay.
James, tell us all about Philip Larkin and your story.
Okay, well, what I wanted to share with you today is an ancient memory of the northeast of England and of a journey by train that I made in 1969. When I finished school and got my A-levels, as they were called then, I went to Hull University in East Yorkshire, on the north side of the Humber estuary. I bet nobody listening to this program in Savoie here today has ever been there, but there is no doubt in my mind that it is the centre of the universe. In the old part of the town, there's a little street called the Land of Green Ginger. And that, in my opinion, proves my point. So one day in spring, I set off by train to Hull for my interview. And from the station, I got on a bus to the university campus. In those days, buses had a driver and a ticket collector. So you would get on the bus at the bus stop or the terminus, and the ticket collector would come along later to sell you your ticket. After a few minutes, she came up to me. And when she spoke to me, she asked the most extraordinary and beautiful question. She said, "Where are you going, love?" I said to myself, to live in a town in which the first person to speak to me says love is going to be a wonderful experience. And believe me, I was right. It's not just a local expression, but a regional one, and not the only one, in fact. In some other parts of the north, they will say hen or hello hen to both men and women. For me, it's friendly and warm. In French also, we sometimes say bonjour ma poule, although perhaps you might find that vulgar, but it's not vulgar in Northern English. At school in the 60s, I had discovered a poem written by a man called Philip Larkin. It was first published in 1964 when I was 17. As chance would have it, he was the chief librarian of Hull University Library. This poem has accompanied me throughout my life. It's called The Whitsun Weddings. Whitsun is Pentecôte in French. And here is the link with my own life and a journey that I took on many occasions when I was a student at Hull. Larkin, in his poem, describes a train journey late on a hot Whitsun Saturday afternoon from Hull to London, the same journey that I took many times as a student to and from Hull and my home in the London area. His descriptions are both magical and precise, and when I listen to his verses now in my head, 50 years later, I feel that I too am once again on that train, that I too am experiencing the feelings, seeing the sights and the events that he caught out of the window as our train heads west from Hull, and then after Selby, where it crosses the Ouse, south towards London, its terminus, on a hot Saturday afternoon in the early 1960s. Larkin's poem has 8 stanzas. The first describes the train's departure from Hull station, how it crosses its suburbs to the west, behind the backs of houses, he says, with the striking image of a level crossing with cars waiting for the train to pass, a street of blinding windscreens, as the early afternoon spring sunshine is reflected from them. The train then loses itself in the flat agricultural landscape of the Humber Valley. He writes to describe this flat, watery immensity where Skye and Lincolnshire and water meet. Lincolnshire is the county on the other side to the south. It's almost as though time has stopped. And each time I read this line, each time I read it, my heart stops too, and my mind goes back to those enchanted and endless journeys from north to south. And in between, a moving observation of the poetry of everyday life. An ordinary journey by train across Britain's industrial heartland in the 1960s, before it was destroyed by Margaret Thatcher, seen through the eyes of a poet, which makes all the difference. As the train stops to pick up more passengers at Brough, Howden, Doncaster, Retford and Grantham, Larkin realises that at each station the same scene is being played out over and over again on the platform at which the train has stopped. After Saturday afternoon weddings, newly married couples are taking the train to London, and their families have come to the station to see them off. In the 60s, young couples didn't fly off to Mallorca or to the Caribbean for their honeymoon, especially working class people. They climb aboard and Larkin observes and writes, "Free at last and loaded with the sum of all they saw, we hurried towards London, puffing gouts of steam." Only old people like me can understand this image of the white smoke and steam pouring from the locomotive, swirling around the carriages as it pulls them down towards their terminus, King's Cross and the capital. The last stanza describes the train's arrival later on that hot afternoon. He writes, "There we were aimed, like an arrow falling towards a target, almost as though the train and its passengers, 2 by 2, these newlyweds as we say, were falling towards their destinies." The word aimed gives an impression of something deliberate and perhaps even inevitable. As they get to the end of their train journey and the beginning of their married life, Larkin writes, "I thought of London spread out in the sun, its postal districts packed like squares of wheat." What a wonderful image, and an image I can conjure up like a prayer or a precious memory every time I travel by train. That is the force and beauty of poetry, and that is why we should read it and write it.
Oh my goodness, well, James, that was just amazing. Thank you so much. Very touching. I'd say it's a bit higher than the B2 level as I was heading out for at the beginning, and more C1, but fantastic for all these wonderful images. And listeners, don't hesitate. If you want to be able to listen to it again, we will put the link on Your English Workshop for the YouTube to listen to this again. But before we finish, let's just go back to our expression quickly, and then I'm going to ask one tiny little question. So our expression, chasing rainbows, pursuing dreams when you try to follow your dreams. The implication here, however, is that you might be better off forgetting your dreams sometimes. Well, everyone, thank you all for coming and listening to us today. And thank you as well for coming, James. It was very kind of you.
It's been a pleasure.
So don't hesitate. If you want to listen to the podcast again, you will hear us on YouTube. You will find it on our website and LinkedIn page. Next week we will have another interview with someone here today, or next week, and we'll be back with another guest. So please don't hesitate to listen to us again next week. At 1 o'clock today, you have Patrick Masson and Place of the Associations. At 2:15, you have Astrid and Toute Beauté. At 5 o'clock, you've got 1 hour and one community, Saint Ours. At 6 o'clock, you've got Jérôme with the Économie Autrement. So stay tuned to Radio Grand Lac today on 92.1. Well, bye to you from us at you.
Your English Weekly. Your English Weekly. La chronique 100% en anglais de Radio Grand Lac avec Sinead.
Radio Grand Lac.